Chapter 243. Disregarding Wang's actions for the moment, his judgment should be correct. The human-faced arachnid that had appeared on Wang's body was most likely the spoils of war that Wang had hidden from the human-faced arachnid hunting operation. Not only did it not provide any help to Qingli, but it also turned the tables on him when he was in his most dire straits. The spoils of war had undoubtedly absorbed the nutrients from Wang. But compared to number 3, who had devoured many of its own kind, there was still an essential difference. Number 3 should be able to sense this difference. It wanted to escape with all its heart, but it was still a step too late. Not to mention the fact that the nutrients it had just devoured had been completely poured out. It had become a part of number 3. Xianxia could clearly feel the entire process of the human-faced arachnids devouring. This was definitely not a good experience. If even he was like this, then what about Wang? Number 3's actions were very much in line with its ugly outer shell and violent instincts. But if Wang was added to the mix, then the meaning would be completely different. From Zheng Zhao's perspective, perhaps Wang could be 10 times more vicious than he was just now, but he would never use such a crude method. He was like a beast with low intelligence. Wang? Child, are you all right? Zheng Zhao was nearly rendered speechless when his own lines were stolen. But the pressing situation forced him to try. Wang, I can't hold on much longer. You don't need to. Zheng Zhao's meaning was that he hoped to separate his thoughts from the depths of the mental plane. He hoped that he would no longer be bound to the evolution field and the human-faced arachnid. But Wang's reply was despairing. Child, you are very important. Very important. The evolution field completely collapsed the moment their thoughts intersected. But Zheng Zhao was unable to retract his projected thoughts. It was like a tenacious kite string. One end was connected to Zheng Zhao, and the other end was pulled by the human-faced arachnid that Wang was residing in. It floated in the endless void. This feeling was not unfamiliar. The Order of Justice had long since grasped the method to control the human-faced arachnid. When they conducted experiments, the first ablatums were the controllers. This feeling was very complicated. It was like a combination of walking a dog and flying a kite. Sometimes, the phenomenon of a soul attachment would occur. It was as if one had transformed into a human-faced arachnid and roamed in the depths of the void. Because of his discovery of this phenomenon, Wang had even specially developed an application. It was a faith product provided to large clients, the source of tonight's chaos, the human-faced arachnid exoskeleton armor. But now it seemed that there was a deep reason why Wang was so concerned about his little invention. Perhaps he had long since anticipated that there would be a day when he would ride a true human-faced arachnid and dive into the deepest depths of the mental plane. After many days of experimentation, Zheng Zhao was very clear that the depth of the human-faced arachnid's dive on the mental plane far exceeded that of the first ablatums. There were 5 types of depths in the spiritual plane: the shallow zone, the middle zone, the deep zone, as well as the abyss zone and the polar zone. In short, they were known as the 3 zones, 1 zone and 1 zone. Those who were not extraordinaries or those who had specialized in B-class and above would find it very difficult to enter the latter 2 levels. Zheng Zhao's limit was the middle zone, and even within Wang's profound spiritual cultivation he could only stay in the deep zone. If he wanted to go deeper, he would need the support of a holy artifact and pay a considerable price. But from the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, staying in the deep zone was the most normal thing. He could enter the abyss zone or even the depths of the polar zone at any time. This sort of zone had already been completely cut off from the material plane. It was impossible for any purely physical instrument to detect its existence. In other words, this sort of darksider life form completely followed its instincts in its actions. It had no intelligence to speak of. It would often enter the shallow zone of its own accord because of the temptation of food, and react with the emotions and consciousness of people. This gave people the opportunity to capture it. Yes, as long as the human-faced arachnid interfered with an external object, it would inevitably affect the depth of its concealment. The degree of influence corresponded to the depth of the interference target on the mental plane. The closer the depth of the 2 sides was, the smaller the influence on the human-faced arachnid. Zheng Zhao had a general understanding of Wang's current resolute method of doing things. Perhaps he could reduce the influence of the interference to the minimum. He could use the human-faced arachnid's innate talent to search for the gate of truth hidden in the depths of the boundless void. and Weng had already begun to move. The marvelous probing waves were transformed by the human-faced arachnid to cut into the deeper depths of the mental plane. Xianxia wasn't too clear about the specific process of probing as a kite string, but there was one thing he didn't understand. Why did it have to search on the mental plane? Was the gate of truth nothing more than an illusory spirit? Just as he was puzzled, and Weng took the initiative to communicate telepathically with him. It's a pity, child. I can't pass on my current experience to you. You don't understand how interesting this experience is. What I can tell you is this. Don't use the popular analogy of the order to speculate on the truth. The structure of the mental plane, the way the mental and the material interferes, is much more interesting than you can imagine. Of course, I also have to thank Ouyang, thank his laboratory. On the rooftop of Building A, Fairchild turned his face and looked at Ouyang Chen, who had just walked to his side. How long are you going to let Weng corrupt your laboratory? Ouyang Chen loosened his bow tie a bit, allowing himself to enter a more relaxed state. At the same time, he became more engrossed. He let out a breath and said softly, "It's true that it's good to reinforce a house when an earthquake is already brewing, but it's impossible to reinforce a city. We need to release a certain amount of energy, and sometimes we even need to detonate it. This is what the laboratory does." Fairchild sneered, "You and Weng must get along very well." "I used to." Ouyang Chen did not deny it. Then he asked in reply, "Mr. Fairchild, are you not going to provide some information? I know nothing about Weng's plans. I'm talking about the human-faced arachnid." The human-faced arachnid? This Darksider life form is more marvelous than we can imagine. Quantum Corporation is one way of saying it. The Society's research is another. Of course, there's also the Order of Justice. Is there a place for it in the ancient records of the Order? Fairchild sank into deep thought. He needed to recall and weigh the pros and cons. However, the development of the situation did not give him much time. Number 3, who was floating in the depths of the void, had already switched frequencies for the 5th time under Weng's control. This time there were some subtle changes. And Weng was not sure what Fairchild saw. He projected his thoughts over with incomparable concentration. However, a more substantial change occurred within Number 3. It occurred in the depths of the human-faced arachnid's inherent chaos. Hualala sounds rang out like the trembling of a chain. There was practically no pattern to the random trembling, but this sound, that could be sensed and distinguished, was itself incompatible with the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. Chapter 244. And Weng never rejected order, but he wanted it to be under his control. Right now, all of his energy was focused on controlling the probing of the outside world. He was unable to completely take care of the interior of the human-faced arachnid. Even if he did, it would be useless. And Weng had once attempted to sort out the chaotic interior of the human-faced arachnid to form a complete model, but he had failed as expected. This was because chaos was the nature of the human-faced arachnid. It could not be changed. Therefore, he needed to use the kite string that was Xianxia to resist the primal chaos within the human-faced arachnid's body. He needed to maintain his basic rationality so that he wouldn't be completely suppressed by the human-faced arachnid's instincts. But now, Weng had actually sensed the power of order within the human-faced arachnid's body. He had never doubted the results of his research, so the answer was very clear. An external force had joined the fray. Without a doubt, this power came from the spoils of war. That thing had clearly been shattered by the human-faced arachnid's devouring power, but for some unknown reason, it was pieced back together. Chaos was shattered, and it could only become even more chaotic. The fact that it could be pieced back together meant that its chaos was just a disguise, a brilliant simulation. This reminded Weng of the conviction product he had just developed. The little thing was a reflection of his thoughts. He had wanted to spend some time combing through it and collecting more data, but Child's appearance had ruined his initial plan. From that moment on, the development of the situation became more and more ridiculous, and now it was completely unrecognizable. Simple recollections were meaningless, but clear content could help people organize their thoughts. Following this clue all the way back, Weng finally confirmed that his previous judgment had been wrong. That was definitely not some spoils of war. It was a replica. Perhaps it was a product of faith that he had created. As far as he knew, the current owner of that thing had been replaced by a certain young man, from the taste he had just swallowed, that thing was more advanced than his initial version, to the point that it was almost as if it was the real thing. However, Wang was not surprised. That young man had some kind of unbelievable power of order, and with his special ability he was able to stop the changes of the unbalanced state time and time again. Ouyang should express his gratitude. Otherwise he might not have had the time to set up the logic world. However, Wang also remembered that the young man should have been isolated from the logic world. What a miraculous little fellow. Of course, it was also infuriating. The deviation in the direction of his mind caused Wang's previous probing efforts on the mental plane to go to waste. He lost that momentary clue that might have led to the gate of truth. However, he did not let emotions like anger take the upper hand. Instead, he directed the probe waves in the opposite direction immediately. Wang performed a self-examination on the human-faced arachnid, locking onto the elements of order that were incompatible with chaos. He seized the opportunity to push back. Any search and probing would be empty talk if the source of interference wasn't disposed of. The vibrating vibrations of the chains grew clearer and clearer. The corresponding information continued to join and combine, finally forming a dark chain. It twisted and stretched, piercing through the interior of number 3's chaotic shell. It radiated countless strands of barbs that seeped into every part of the human-faced arachnid. The situation was much more troublesome than Wang had originally judged. The power of order used this form to declare its invasion of the human-faced arachnid. As for the longer part of the chain, it extended into the depths of the mental plane. Without a doubt, the other end must be contacting that boy wonder. He's called Luonan, right? Wang's thoughts coiled, forming an incorporeal incantation. He had seen Luonan's basic information before. He had used the evolution field to lock onto Luonan's aura. This was enough for a secret-bound first ablatum. A highly lethal secret spell gradually formed. He would fire it without hesitation the instant he locked onto his target. He would forcefully blast through the barrier between the mental and the material plane, eliminating the worry of the rear. This was not the smartest method, but it was the most straightforward. Even if this would cause his parasitic soul within the human-faced arachnid to enter a dangerously weak state. Wang's mind extended out along the chain. With the assistance of the human-faced arachnid, the sealed and chaotic void structure of the logic world was no longer able to block it. Wang originally had no intention of using this ability on the plane of reality. But now the situation had changed. He roughly remembered the last place Luonan appeared before the logic world was erected. He traced the direction of the chain and scanned the plane of reality at the same time. Wang was confident that he could lock onto his target within 2 seconds. The probing wave smoothly cut out of the logic world. It was hard for Ouyang to control the probing power of the human-faced arachnid. But at this moment, the information that came flooding in from the outside was not the scene of a metropolis. Instead, it was a starry sky that left one in a daze. It was so unfamiliar. Wang was dazed for only an instant. He soon came to a realization. This was the projection of a certain person's consciousness. He had already made direct contact with Luonan. The kid's combat experience seemed to be lacking. He practically had no anti-detection methods in a confrontation on the mental plane. The two sides instantly clashed. Wang was just about to blast out the secret spell of death, but he had no choice but to stop. He had never imagined that the scene of a person's consciousness could be this vast and majestic. It was true that the power within was practically non-existent. But this kind of performance in itself was an inconceivable achievement. This was just the reproduction of Luonan's perception. He needed to trace back to the origin to find Luonan's core consciousness. But behind this starry sky scene were the auras of countless living beings. They appeared here in the form of stars. Together they formed a vast and hazy structure. Plus, the scene formed from Luonan's observation and perception was absolutely not just grand. He made full use of the mental plane, including the reality of the logic world. The starry sky looked flat and uniform as a whole, but it actually contained complex and warped details. It was like a maze. As for Luonan's core consciousness, it was hidden behind layers upon layers of curtains. It was hard to discern its location. If Luonan had truly used his power to forcefully construct the scene, Wang could have charged in all directions and relied on feedback to find his target. But in the pure domain of perception, the more one searched, the easier it was to be led by the nose. Also, the environment here was simply like a fragrant soup pot for the human-faced arachnid. Its powerful and terrifying instincts began to stir once more. This diluted Weng's power. Weng made a prompt decision. He gave up on probing the plane of reality. He didn't want to waste any more time. He still had the chain. The power of the heavily chained crow was increasing. It had a restraining effect on the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid. It made number 3 feel uneasy. Weng simply strengthened number 3's instincts in this aspect. He let number 3 search in reverse along the chain. No matter what, the master of this chain was undoubtedly Luo Nan. But number 3's probing suddenly came to a halt. This was because at this moment, an absolutely oppressive feeling came whistling from the other end of the chain. The sudden increase in pressure turned the chaotic nature of the human-faced arachnid into a pot of boiling oil. If the human-faced arachnid possessed consciousness, its boiling instincts would certainly drive it to scream loudly, "Danger! Danger!" A terrifying power of the same origin but different descended with a rumble. Number 3's combat instincts were pushed to their limits. A battle across space erupted in an instant. Weng's control suddenly fell to its lowest point before the boiling instincts of the human-faced arachnid. He was like a small boat bobbing up and down amidst the roaring lava. He could capsize at any time. The situation was out of his control once more. He suddenly understood. The one at the other end of the chain was absolutely not Luo Nan. It was a damned human-faced arachnid. An extremely powerful one. Chapter 245. The instantaneous spatial perception was quite clear. The distance between the two human-faced arachnids was extremely far. At the very least, it far exceeded the limits of the normal senses between human-faced arachnids. In other words, this was a collision that should not have occurred. Then was this a trap? A trap specifically targeted at the human-faced arachnid, a trap targeted at Weng? Before Weng could understand the root cause of the change in the situation, the clash between the human-faced arachnids had already entered a white-hot state. The hazy starry sky was filled with the powerful pressure of hostility. Number 3's body was forcefully warped. Every movement was an all-out confrontation between tangible and intangible forces. For this reason, the chaotic power within number 3 revolved at a higher speed. It was like a boiler, crushing and incinerating all internal fuel in order to provide an even more powerful internal energy. From Weng's perspective, this was simply a calamity. After he abandoned his fleshly body, his soul was placed within number 3's body, achieving a partial fusion. But in the end they had not completely fused as one. There was still a considerable portion, the most crucial portion of his intelligence, that remained independent. After boiler number 3 was activated, nearly a tenth of Weng's soul region had evaporated in a few short seconds. Many of his memory materials had been wiped out in an instant, causing him to be slightly dazed. Only when Jing Xiao, who was affected, let out a blood-curdling scream did Weng suddenly wake up. The kite string was about to break. How could the chain still be so sturdy? A self-mocking thought flashed through Weng's mind. He forced himself to forget the imminent threat of death. He poured his own power into the chain in an attempt to control number 3 and break free from it. The heavily chained crow was the only channel to contact the two human-faced arachnids. It was also the main battlefield where the two human-faced arachnids clashed. If Weng wanted to destroy the clash, breaking the chain was the most effective method. With Weng's help, number 3's power suddenly rose by a level. Her 8 limbs plucked at the void, moving with all her might in an attempt to go against the chain. The heavily chained crow became perfectly straight. The pulling force and the opposing force acted at the same time, causing the shaking of the chain to intensify. The vibrations of the chain connected into one, and finally turned into the sharp, weng sound of a rubber band on the verge of collapse. Just a bit more. Just a bit more. The more intense the clash between the human-faced arachnids, the more terrifying the internal pressure of boiler number 3 became. The domain of Weng's soul continued to be corroded, but he still needed to accelerate the process to ensure the output of number 3's power. This was the stupidest kind of consumption, but in a rush, Weng had no other choice. At this moment, Weng felt that he and the heavily chained crow were like 2 burning sticks of gunpowder. It was a matter of who would burn to the end first, ignite the explosives and explode. The truth is above. Buzz. The prayer and the trembling occurred at the same time. Another wave of collision exploded on the chains. The powerful impact finally broke through the limits of the heavily chained crow, causing it to suddenly lose its special structure and collapse with a hum. 03's body suddenly stopped as the chain was broken. However, Weng was not happy at all. At this moment, the area of his soul had shrunk to 2/3 of its original size. A large amount of memory material had been annihilated. Even with his tenacious will, he appeared to be in a trance for a while. In addition, in the final clash of power, Weng no longer had the strength to protect other areas. Zheng Zhao's kite string had also been severed. 03 floated in the hazy starry sky. Starlight filled the sky, but there was no longer any clear trail to guide it. It was as if it had lost its way in the starry sky and had lost its direction. Weng caught his breath and sorted out the area of his soul that had become a mess. He also tried to use this opportunity to increase his control over 03. However, just as his soul area was gradually spreading towards the chaotic area of 03, the internal pressure of the boiler number 3, after a short period of cooling, ignited with a rumble. Weng forcefully endured the pain of being roasted by poisonous fire, ensuring that his heart was clear. However, his mind still sank heavily. 03 slowly turned its body. Its instincts were restless again, and it was even more intense than when it was in the fierce battle earlier. At this moment, Weng heard a kind of fine low-pitched sound. It was like the background noise that existed in a big city at all times. It was faint and undetectable yet everywhere. If one were to look closely, they would be able to see a lot of messy information. Amidst this faint noise that was hard to ignore, the shadow was like a muddy river that silently flowed past. A huge and ugly body floated out from within. Its limbs were spread out and its demonic eyes flickered. When it first appeared, it was at the side of 03. When its crooked and bent body completely floated above the shadowy water, it was already in front of 03. Through 03, Weng locked onto his target from number 3's perspective. This human-faced arachnid was clearly a size larger than 03. Its body was more solid as well. The powerful pressure that assaulted its face made it hard for 03 to suppress its restlessness. 03's instincts should lean towards fleeing, but in the end, it chose to stay in this star field. This had nothing to do with courage. The reason for this was the incorporeal power of order. It had been placed into this hazy starry sky, turning it into a strange cage. Even though it was boundlessly vast, the two human-faced arachnids had already locked each other firmly. Only when victory and defeat were decided, when life and death were decided, would this be the final conclusion. It was that mysterious chain. It seemed to have collapsed, but in reality, it had turned from being tangible to incorporeal. It had used an even more inconceivable form to arrange order. It had displayed an inescapable coercive power. Just as Weng understood this clearly, the human-faced arachnids had already begun fighting again. The human-faced arachnids were not like intelligent life forms. They did not speak nonsense. Under the urge of their instincts, both sides activated their charging mode and collided with each other. Number 3's left commissary were bitten off by the powerful arachnid in just a single exchange. The powerful arachnid swallowed the commissary into its stomach. Number 3's sharp limbs on the same side stabbed into the side of the arachnid's humanoid body. The wound sizzled and burned. Bloody flames soared. The two human-faced arachnids let out soundless roars of pain at the same time. But this kind of direct wrestling mode did not change at all. It was as if they had returned to the ancient Colosseum. They used the most bloody form to please others. Then at this moment, who was the one they were trying to please? Weng strove to maintain a clear line of thought during the confrontation between the human-faced arachnids. The changes in the chain displayed the exquisite switching of the power of order. This was absolutely not a spontaneous change. At the very least, there was a frame that encompassed this starry sky. Who did the frame belong to? Weng knew the answer. But in the face of this hazy starry sky, even with his experience and ruthlessness, it was hard for him to come up with a suitable method to lock onto the person behind the scenes. Unless. Number 3's body trembled violently once more. It was at a complete disadvantage in this wrestling. Right now, half of its ugly face had been bitten off by the powerful arachnid. It had lost half of its 6-colored demonic eyes. Its aura was rapidly weakening. There was no chance of victory if this continued. And Wang only used 1/10 of a second to make a final judgment. The corresponding choice did not take up too much time. His mind reflected internally. A gloomy round bead appeared within the area of his soul. The bead was covered densely with strange and bizarre patterns. This was the secret curse of death that he had formed in order to kill Luo Nan as quickly as possible. Right now Wang did not hesitate at all. His soul's strength crushed over, shattering the secret curse. A fatal negative energy swept through the area of his soul. The pain of his mind was indescribable with words. But he could use a similar method to vent it. His mind surged and he roared loudly on the mental plane. Chapter 246. An invisible wave swept across the starry sky, spreading far and wide. At Wang's side he still understood the true meaning of the fluctuations. Expanding another circle, only pure power was exposed, pushing outwards layer by layer. Under the effect of this power, the starlight that filled the sky was like candlelight in a gale, about to be extinguished. In fact, no stars could be destroyed. This hazy starry sky was nothing more than a projection of Luo Nan's perception. It was purely a picture of information. What Wang was doing now was using the probing waves to sort out the veins within, following the path of the projection and pouring the relevant information back into the material plane. The blessing of the projection of the scales of truth, the information of the deadly secret curse, and the instincts of the human-faced arachnid merged together. Its penetrative power was incomparable. Whether it was the logic world or the scene of Luo Nan's consciousness, none of them were able to isolate it. The probing waves pushed forward layer by layer and they soon received results. In the material plane, in the metropolis, the flames of life flickered. There was no actual damage, but within the area of influence, there was information that resembled the ravings of hallucinations. It flowed into the tens of thousands of people. The vast majority of the information would be unconsciously filtered out by people. A small portion would form a relatively clear consciousness, but it would be ignored due to the lack of corresponding information. Only a limited few pieces of information would touch upon those with keen senses, who were familiar with Luo Nan, and form an instinctive reaction, forming feedback. Although it was limited, it was enough. "Nanster, is someone calling you?" Shuai turned his head in all directions but couldn't see anything. He was quite puzzled for a moment. Luo Nan went, "Oh," but he didn't respond. He continued to look up at the sky. It was unknown when the autumn rain that had fallen for the middle of the night had stopped. The power supply at Frost River Reality had yet to be restored, and the evacuation of the trapped citizens was nearing its end. The sounds of people gradually grew sparse, making the night seem as dark as ink and the shadows of the buildings dim. The clearing of the outer region was almost complete. The sniper point at Yulon Hotel had just been confirmed to be cleared. The members of the association all went to the street where the Yulon Hotel was located. This was currently the command center for the government and the military, and it was also the most well-informed place. The military ships slowly entered the airspace above, representing the military's full involvement in the incident. The warship was floating above the city. This was a rare sight and it attracted a large number of people to watch and point at it. Although Luo Nan's gaze was also looking up, it was directed at the area of Frost River Reality. The profoundness of the logic world was reflected in the pitch-black cluster of high-rise buildings, behind the void where the naked eye could not see. Shuai didn't receive a response, so he didn't think much of it. He imitated Luo Nan and raised his head to look at the conjoined building complex in the distance. But no matter how he sized it up, he was unable to see anything. He could only scratch his head. The way of the world right now is really evil. With his own strength he could casually create a space to use. It's no wonder why Hall Master Zhang said that if one isn't able to adapt to the changes in one's cultivation, one would be eliminated as soon as one awakens from it. Their gazes were also directed at the association members. The vast majority of the onlookers were still at a loss over the circumstances of the sudden disappearance of the large group of terrorists. Luo Nan and his group had already obtained a clearer answer. Papercut did his best to widen his eyes and mumbled, "So it turns out President Ouyang is watching." Logic World? The association didn't hear anything about it before. You've tricked them so badly. I'm just taking advantage of the situation. Red Fox was the only member of the association who made direct contact with Xianxia tonight. He more or less had to bear the responsibility of explaining. He shot a glance at Luo Nan and sneered, "If you want to set rules for others, how can you do it without bringing out the momentum of a thunderbolt? The logic world is erected with full explosive power. I really want to see the faces of those orders." As he spoke, Red Fox's gaze stopped on Luo Nan's face. Even with Xianxia's judgment of being ignorant and the repeated verification of reality, Red Fox could not help but want to test the young man's introverted and immature performance after true contact. "Do you see anything?" Luo Nan raised his head to look at the sky, not reacting at all. Shui Lei coughed to remind Red Fox, but he didn't receive a response. He could only reach out and poke Red Fox. It was as if Luo Nan had just woken up from a dream. He turned his head to scan his surroundings. He Yuan was the society's full representative right now. She was communicating with the government and the military. She was so busy that not even her shadow could be seen. Bamboo Pole had followed her as a technical member. Zhang Yingying and Bai Xinyan had gone to the military's security vehicle. It was unknown what they were up to. Cat Eyes said that she was very tired and went to find a place to daydream. Only Shui Lei remained by his side. Red Fox's gaze pointed at Luo Nan. It was hard to avoid awkwardness when Luo Nan and Red Fox met each other after such an intense conflict had occurred. Luo Nan had no experience in dispelling this. Shui Lei could not help either. Luo Nan could only blink. "What did you say?" Red Fox did not get angry. He just pointed in the direction of Frost River reality. "You are proficient in mental senses. You can see things more clearly than us. What's going on over there? Can you tell me?" "You're not looking." "Oh, I saw a bit earlier." Luo Nan was quite used to this sort of matter-of-fact attitude. He thought for a moment and said, "It's a precise structure that interferes with the mental plane and the material plane. It's like the shield of truth, but it's very different. This really isn't the same." Red Fox was a bit unable to continue facing Luo Nan's bewildering logic. He could only laugh dryly. Most of the manifestations of extraordinary powers are like this. He gave Luo Nan face this time. He did not let Luo Nan blurt out the word, "nonsense." Luo Nan was speechless for a time. He was not stumped by Red Fox's question. It was just that the results of clairvoyance were far too complicated to describe with words. Plus, the results of his clairvoyance were a sort of correction to his previous understanding. From Luo Nan's previous understanding, the mental plane was a sort of deep multi-layered structure. It was like countless curtains stacked together. The layers were distinct. The closer one was to the material plane, the thicker the curtains were. And the lowest part was connected to the material plane. They interfered with each other. The degree of interference depended on the magnitude of the applied force. Therefore, interference between the mental and material planes occurred on everyone. It was just that the interference of ordinary people was negligible. It could be ignored. The interference of ability users was much more obvious. The Shield of Truth was the most powerful and clearest interference method that Luo Nan had ever seen. It was what he believed to be the benchmark of interference between the mental and material planes. As for Ruiwen, her soul and fleshly body were as one. It was a different situation. It was incomparable. However, the interference of the logic world shattered Luo Nan's understanding that he had just formed not too long ago. Under the senses of his clairvoyance, the multi-layered curtains of the mental plane rolled down together. They no longer possessed the sense of layers. Instead, they overlapped and warped, even tearing apart. Some of them were originally quite a distance away from the material plane, but they forcefully converged together. Because of this, the lower layers of curtains even had an interference effect, twisting into a ball. This was the third state of the relationship between the mental and material planes that Luo Nan had seen. It was also the most complicated one. Chapter 247. Through a complicated method of interference between the spiritual and material planes, Xianxia achieved the peeling off of the material plane's surface layer. Virtual and real interacted with each other, constructing a spatial fault that resembled the real world. The rules and regulations inside were no easier than building a skyscraper. Delving into the details would only exhaust one's mind, and the gains would not make up for the losses. Luonan was just looking at the general situation. He didn't continue to get tangled up. Far too much information was involved in explaining these things to Red Fox. A good portion of it was Luonan's personal comprehension. Right now he lacked confidence in his ability to express himself with words. It was difficult for him to speak for a time. Just as he was pondering how to respond, the sound of a car came from behind him. Luonan was just about to turn his head to check when his neck tightened. Someone had already grabbed him by the back of his collar and forcefully dragged him over. His back smashed against the lower edge of the car. "Stop talking nonsense and get in the car." Zhang Yingying popped her head out of the carriage and urged impatiently. The vehicle she had transferred over should be a military security vehicle. It was rather large and the rear compartment was enclosed. It would not be a problem for it to carry dozens of people. What's so urgent? Luonan thought that there was another mission, so he didn't bicker with Zhang Yingying. He nodded toward Red Fox and boarded the carriage first. Behind him, Shuelei, the Red Fox, and the others also came up one after another. However, very soon everyone was a little confused. The situation inside was a little different from what they had imagined. The space was relatively narrow and it was densely packed with all kinds of equipment. It seemed a little crowded after a few people came in. "Go to the hospital." Bai Xinyan had just taken off her trench coat and changed into a white doctor's coat. She even put on sterile gloves. She looked like she was about to go all out. Luonan was stupefied for a moment. Zhang Yingying, who was next to him, simply took off his clothes. She pulled off his outer cover and lifted his underwear. "Wow." Shuelei sighed. There were so many people in the car. Luonan's face heated up. "Hey." Zhang Yingying didn't care about this at all. Her fingers dug into Luonan's undergarments, and she even impudently stroked the lines of muscles on his back and waist. "You might be an F-rank disabled candidate, but you actually aren't particularly skinny and weak." Her soft and smooth fingertips streaked across. The sensation was warm, but it caused Luonan to quiver and shiver. He even forgot to speak the words that were at the tip of his tongue. Judging from his body fat percentage, his physique isn't any worse than his peers. However, compared to soul energy, it's nothing. "Don't move." Bai Xinyan shouted at Luonan to stop the writhing and struggling Luonan. She connected the wires of the apparatus to various parts of Luonan's body. In this way, Luonan was embarrassed to move even if he wanted to. He could only obediently allow Zhang Yingying to completely remove his clothes. He asked helplessly, "What exactly do you want?" Acting cool is fun for a moment, but in the blink of an eye, it's the crematorium. "I'm here to bring down your fever." Zhang Yingying temporarily took on the role of nurse. She felt that it was very interesting. She used her finger to poke at Luonan's body. She played quite happily. Bai Xinyan saw that Luonan's body temperature was rising. She didn't allow Zhang Yingying to tease him any further. She began to adjust the apparatus and explained, "No one knows when the effects of the Shield of Truth will disappear. And right now, the amplification of your soul strength is quite dangerous. One mistake and the two sides will collide. You won't even have the chance to save yourself. So, you need to be under observation for 24 hours. No matter how good the equipment here is, it's still better to be at the hospital." Luonan laughed bitterly. "It can't be that serious, right? Just prepare for the worst." Bai Xinyan's tone was light, but in her heart she was already certain that the trouble that awaited them would not be small. This could be seen from the fate of the first two generations of the Luo family. Moreover, the problem of the imbalance of body and soul was not the only problem. Red Fox's brows furrowed before Papercut's voice fell. He subconsciously extended his hand and pressed his ear. His gaze flickered toward Luonan. Shuelei, who was at the side, saw his actions and exclaimed, "Did you hear it too?" Red Fox indicated for him to be quiet, then he made a few gestures toward Papercut. After the logic world was established, the psychic wave network entered a state of paralysis. It had yet to recover, and the secret communication between them was far less convenient than before. Fortunately, Papercut could understand. He quickly nodded, closed his eyes and sensed for a moment. Then his expression turned grave. "The spirit summoning technique?" "Yeah, the spirit summoning technique." Bai Xinyan sighed, which was rare for her. "I don't know what trouble your boss Luo has stirred up. And Wang is clearly trapped in the logic world. His situation is terrible, But Wang still tries to use this method to lock onto Wang's position regardless of the cost. Plus he's almost succeeded. The gazes of everyone in the car turned toward Luonan. Luonan had nothing to say. He could only wear the apparatus and wires on his body. He acted like a puppet, allowing others to do as they pleased. The door to the car opened again at this time. Cat Eyes, who had gone into a daze just now, boarded the car. Bai Xinyan said, Sister Nun and Bamboo Pole will move together with the military. Now that everyone on our side is here, there's no need to delay. No matter who we're facing, it's always best to distance ourselves. The car suddenly increased in speed as they spoke. Soon they left the conjoined building complex behind. The group of people was basically retreating from the battlefield. 2 minutes passed and the group exchanged glances. The range of the spirit summoning technique should be out of range by now. The group of people let out sighs of relief. They no longer needed to pay attention to the intermittent shouts in their ears. Right now, the straight-line distance between the security car and Frost River reality was over 10 kilometers. Even the secret-bound First Ablatum would find it hard to reach, let alone Wang, who was separated by a layer of the logic world. However, Luonan was not particularly optimistic. He did not have any hopes that Wang would be able to remove the pressure from Wang just by moving the car. For the current Wang and even for Luonan, distance was not something that held much significance. The intertwining of the many layers of curtains of the logic world caused distortions to appear in the distance on the mental plane. In a situation where the distance on the material plane remained the same, a misalignment appeared between 2 points on the mental plane. It was like the overused example of spatial folding. Space was like a piece of paper. The two ends were far apart, but when the paper was folded, the originally long distance would become within reach. Luonan did not merely observe this special structural pattern. In fact, Luonan immediately discovered a flaw and opportunity after Wang ordered the human-faced arachnid to swallow the high imitation within Qingli's body. Through the heavily chained crow, Luonan used the Wraith sign, which was located far away in a secret location of the Blood Flame Order, to establish a connection with the Order of Justice's human-faced arachnid. Luonan used the characteristics of the logic world to take advantage of the situation to construct a colosseum, or perhaps an altar. Luonan used the format pyramid as a foundation to erect the framework of the altar. This was something Luonan was already familiar with. It did not take any effort at all. The only difference this time was the span. What Luonan could use Wang could use as well. The existence of the logic world had severely distorted the mental plane, but it could not stop Wang's evil thoughts. When the evil thoughts attacked, strangely enough, the projection of the scales of truth floated in Luonan's mind, especially the pair of black and white plates floating up and down. A familiar whisper seeped into Luonan's mind. As long as one yearns for the truth, there will certainly be two sides of the scales. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Chapter 248. Luonan's senses were extremely subtle. In the past, when he erected the framework of the altar, he could always transcend the world and not be directly affected by the sacrificer, only receiving the relevant benefits, as long as he could bear it. But now, Wang's evil thoughts had attacked and the projection of the scales of truth had inexplicably entered. That feeling of being high and mighty had been offended. The frame of the sacrificial altar he had propped up had also been eroded and collided with by external forces. This had never happened before. In the order of justice, the scales of truth were a supreme holy relic. It was equivalent to a sacrificial tool and could be considered a framework for the altar. Wang had already been placed on the scales of truth, which meant that he was the sacrificial object of the scales of truth. One object could be used for two purposes. Their goals were different and their natures were different. Conflict was inevitable. And what Wang was doing right now wasn't just letting the two frames collide together. Wang's malicious intent had locked onto his target. He clearly wanted to pull Luonan into the depths of the maelstrom. It seemed like he had succeeded. Luonan tried to expel the projection of the scales of truth from his mind, but it was useless. This toy grew clearer and clearer, especially on the side of the white plate. It seemed to possess a soul-stealing power that pulled at his mind. It was unavoidable. Upon closer inspection, it seemed to be related to the structural model of the shield of truth. As a result, his body was somewhat tightened, as if he had been tied up by invisible strings. Luo Nan struggled a bit uncomfortably, but he never thought that the equipment outside his body would immediately sound an alarm. The gazes of everyone in the car suddenly converged on him. Zhang Yingying, the temporary nurse, immediately raised her hand high. "I didn't do anything. Even if you want to do it, you can't." Bai Xinyan was using the AR image to integrate the data from the instrument. All kinds of graphics and data were arranged in different levels. Those who were not experts would feel their eyelids twitch. However, at this time, everyone could see that in the left region on a nearly flat wavy line, there was a series of subtle fluctuations. "The strength of my body has changed, although the change is very small." Bai Xinyan's gaze turned and swept past Luo Nan's face. "The shield of truth hasn't cracked, right?" "I'm not too sure about that." Luo Nan reached out to scratch his cheeks. He was a bit embarrassed. Although this matter was confidential and couldn't be discussed in detail, he didn't pretend to be a hero. Instead, he showed an uncertain attitude. Bai Xinyan raised his eyebrows slightly, but before he could say anything, Zhang Yingying had already slapped his shoulder again. "You don't know? What do you mean by unclear?" "It's not my problem. In fact, it was." Having fallen to this point, Luo Nan had to admit that he had gone too far. Right now, Luo Nan could already sense the existence of a powerful source of heat beside him. That familiar sense of order was undoubtedly Fairchild's. Luo Nan combined the situation within the logic world with the memory fragments of Qingli that were gathered from the high imitation. Luo Nan made a judgment that made him not know whether to laugh or cry. Perhaps, like Child, he had been killed first by An Weng and sent to the scales of truth to be used as a counterweight. Would he also be placed on the altar and become a sacrifice one day? How ironic. The transcendental feeling of constructing the framework of the altar had caused Luo Nan to lose his accurate judgment. Even if An Weng had swallowed the bait himself and bumped into him, the Wraith Sign's level still had the advantage. His eagerness to hunt attitude was too frivolous. After the predicament of near collapse, An Weng immediately used a ruthless and decisive response to give Luo Nan a good lesson. If Luo Nan's guess was correct, An Weng should have seized the moment when Fairchild blessed him with the shield of truth. He used the secret technique of the order, which Luo Nan did not understand, to succeed in one fell swoop. And things would not end here. Right now, Luo Nan seemed to have replaced characters like Fairchild and Ouyang Chen. He had become An Weng's #1 target. Even Luo Nan himself was intoxicated by An Weng's ability to draw hatred. Naturally, the most urgent task was to get the situation back on track. Whether it was President Ouyang or Fairchild, had those two been idle for too long? Maybe An Weng was exerting his strength against Fairchild, and he ended up bringing disaster to the fish in the moat? Everyone could see that Fairchild had blessed Luo Nan. Papercut furrowed his brows and guessed. He was immediately on the right path. Red Fox spoke in a deep voice, or it could be a direct target. It's like hitting a cow across a mountain. Zhang Yingying reached out to point at Red Fox. She was in great agreement. "That's right. Then let's take defensive measures first. Right now there are no conditions." Bai Xinyan shook her head. She raised her wristband to make contact with the outside world. Since she connected. "Sister, your boss has the ability to stir up trouble. Even a layer of the world can't stop him. I suggest that you urge President Ouyang to end this battle quickly." Luo Nan's head hung down. He really did not have the face to see anyone for a time. However, he would not be distracted by the mundane plane for too long. He could not completely rely on others to help him. His mind quickly focused back on the altar frame. He could not relax for even a moment on An Weng's side, even if An Weng was weakening at a visible speed. There's not much time left. An Weng was very clear about his own state. In the beast fighting arena, half of Number 3's limbs had been devoured by the bite. Number 3's expression was dispirited and she had no strength to fight back. An Weng's soul region trembled and shrank. Only half of its peak remained. The rest was torn apart and diverted by the two vortexes. The beast fighting arena was secondary. The projection of the scales of truth was the main target. Since Luo Nan was placed on the scales of truth, he could only be on the side of truth. An Weng had to keep up with the scales of truth, but Luo Nan's weight was absolutely extraordinary. He and Fairchild merged together, causing the projection of the scales of truth to slide into an unbalanced state in an instant. And Wang's mind grew colder and calmer the more dangerous it was in this moment of crisis. It was like the projection of the scales of truth. It was clearly illusory, but it possessed the dignity of a holy object. It possessed the root of immortality. For a short period of time, and Wang could withstand this method of burning his soul. He could even obtain an even stronger tension and achieve an even better result. Bang! It was as if a bowstring had been plucked with force. A probing wave swept across the deep space in the instant the sound rang out. It was more tyrannical and penetrating than any previous wave. In this instant, the logic world and the hazy starry sky were practically transparent to Wang. His consciousness spread to every nook and cranny of the void, to every level. Accompanying the transparency was a layer of fog that floated up. This was the phenomenon formed when the probing wave touched the material plane and interfered with each other. Too much of this mist had probably accumulated. Soon the night sky of the logic world became a bit turbid. Bang! Another rumbling sound rang out, and the visibility of the logic world dropped by another chunk. It was as if a great fog had descended. The three skyscrapers seemed to be warping in the curtain of night. Ouyang, Fairchild and the projection of the scales of truth still had some telepathic connection. He could also indirectly touch upon Wang's state. An ominous omen arose for a time, and he warned Ouyang Qin. Before Ouyang Qin could respond, a bolt of lightning and fire suddenly leaped out from the upper layers of the hazy mist. The glaring forked trajectory was like a heavenly tree that had been cut down. It smashed down. Why was it smashed? Chapter 249. The moment the giant arms smashed down, the seemingly real night sky of the logic world seemed to collapse. Space warped and shook, transforming into fine waves that could be clearly felt. The waves spread across everyone's skin, causing a majority of them to shiver. A corresponding chill emerged from the bottom of their hearts when the projection of the scales of truth at the center of the three buildings suddenly distorted. Its light dimmed and the shadow of the giant arms swallowed it. The illusory projection was clearly unable to obstruct it. The shadow of the giant arm wrapped in lightning rushed down and struck the ceiling of Frost River reality. Even now there was no visible pause. There was not even a particularly strong impact. It was simply like a corrosive acid that penetrated from the ceiling to the bottom. In the blink of an eye, a penetrating wound over 30 meters in diameter was torn open. Then ripples of vibration spread from the crack in all directions. Frost River reality completely collapsed and collapsed. It was only at this moment that a terrifying sonic boom rang out. The glass walls of the three skyscrapers, regardless of whether they were facing Frost River reality or not, were blasted to pieces. The lightning and fire surrounding the giant arm flowed and sputtered. The exploding beams of lightning were like countless living snakes. They leaped into the three surrounding Great Xia buildings and wantonly flew about. Baze, who had just been knocked to the ground floor by Fairchild, just happened to climb to the bottom of Frost River reality. He watched as Frost River reality collapsed and the lightning and fire closed in. Without a word, he crashed into the inner layers of the building. He rolled and dodged, but in the end he was not stuck. Baze's reaction was fast and his luck was pretty good. However, others might not be like him. There was an Ablatum Knight who was in the direction of Frost River reality. Misfortune befell him. The chaotic lightning and fire just so happened to surround him. He could not avoid it. When the lightning touched his body, he wanted to use his painstakingly cultivated extraordinary strength to resist. However, in an instant his sturdy torso was affected by an unimaginable force. His limbs were greatly distorted. It was as if a pair of demonic hands were kneading him like a meatball. He was kneaded into a badly mangled ball of flesh and blood as he tumbled about in the destroyed building. The most terrifying thing was that this person did not die quickly. Muffled screams burst forth from the ball of flesh. They were bitter and desperate. Even a powerhouse like Baze's face turned black when he saw this scene. He did not look back as he crashed into the depths of the building. He wanted to get as far away from the lightning as possible. That's not lightning, at least not the pure kind. Luonan could roughly see that the source of this wave of electricity was the same as the mist created by Wang's probing waves. It originated from the intense interference between the mental and material planes. There was no pattern to this kind of interference. It was chaotic and violent. Coupled with the powerful ionization effect of lightning, this was the final result. But then again, this scattering of electric light covered a diameter of nearly a kilometer. How powerful was the corresponding soul power that acted on the physical plane? Using himself as a standard, he was stronger than 10,000 times. Or 100 million times. That wasn't realistic. Even the unfathomable and unfathomable President Ouyangchen gave Luonan the feeling that he was far from this level. There should be some special way of using him. Luonan's attention was unavoidably drawn to it. However, that area was destined to not be a good target for observation. The terrifying power in the shadow was not only destructive to the material plane, but also to the mental plane. If it was just a little bit late, it would be like the magma of a volcano eruption, pouring down on Yongling's head and face. Luonan's pure observation mode was effective. He did not receive a direct attack. But the human-faced arachnid that was fighting to death in the Astral Colosseum was not so lucky. It let out a miserable hiss at the same time, and its body actually burst into flames at the same time. According to the information transmitted by the Wraith sign, the scorching attack of the giant shadow arm and the chaotic core of the human-faced arachnid were simply like the relationship between a torch and boiling oil. There was still a distance before the human-faced arachnid was ignited. As for the other human-faced arachnid, number 3, she had already been burned through. A portion of her remains had been burned into a steaming mist of energy, which was absorbed and consumed by the endlessly expanding shadow. The Wraith sign, who was entangled above the altar, had a sense of number 3's state. The instantaneous change refreshed the information of its senses, making it even clearer. Behind this terrifying shadow there was something more real. Perhaps it was a powerful and hungry demon. This thing had yet to truly enter the logic world, but its powerful strength had already displayed its vicious and ruthless characteristics clearly before everyone's eyes. The curtain on the mental plane was swaying and fluctuating, twisting and twisting. This made it even more difficult for Luonan to clearly distinguish the true level and position of the demon. He could only make a scenario guess. This demon was like a gluttonous old cat. It stood on the shore, extending its claws to stir the water, hoping to catch delicious fish and eat its fill. Who was it that attracted this old cat? It was undoubtedly the unfathomable Wang, who was currently burning within number 3. Oh, judging from the Wraith sign's senses, that person's mood seemed to be quite good. It was just as Luonan knew. Right now, Wang's soul was ceaselessly withering within the flames ignited by number 3. However, Wang was in a cheerful mood. He wantonly released his emotions under the encirclement of the flames. If his fleshly body was still present, it would be the same as laughing aloud. He should be laughing. Wang was over 60 years old, and he had waited until the era where the heavens and earth were changed. He had been a member of the Order of Justice for 40 years, and he was a firm believer. Unfortunately, he was encumbered by age and his body. No matter how clear his ideals were, the slightest difference was 1,000 miles. He was always blocked from a higher plane, and he no longer had the chance to struggle. But now, as the logic world trembled under the enormous shadow fist of the demon, a crack finally appeared in the incorporeal barrier that had always blocked his head. Looking ahead, perhaps his chances were still slim, but there was still a chance, and it wasn't too far away. The shadow swallowed up a portion of the starry sky. Luonan's perception was unable to form an effective analysis of it. For Wang, this was the best road sign. He no longer needed to distinguish the direction. He drove number 3, which was almost completely burned out, away from the battlefield, and he leaped into the shadow. The Wraith sign did not pursue Wang under the threat of being completely ignited at any moment. Plus, the altar's frame had turned into a pot of porridge from all sorts of disturbances. It was impossible to stop Wang. As for the demon behind the shadow, it happily accepted the food that directly entered its mouth. But this was not enough. The demon's appetite was clearly extremely good. It didn't discover any fatal threat after its attack in the air, so the congealed shadow began to spread. It entered into casting net mode, and its target was pointed at others. Everyone. Everyone in the logic world had become its target. It was guided by chaotic desires. It would chase after whatever was the most delicious. If everything was delicious, then it would want them all. Before the mist of the probing wave that interfered with the material plane could dissipate, the shadow of darkness flooded in, turning it into surging black clouds that pressed down on the logic world. Chapter 250. Child's body glowed with a mercury-like radiance. It collided with the dark clouds and turbid mist that surged toward him. The two forces collided. Nothing had happened at first, but at this moment, the giant shadow arms smashed Frost River reality with unexhausted momentum. It slammed into the ground. At that moment, the shock wave swept across, and the 300-story buildings could be seen shaking at a visible degree. The transverse and longitudinal waves were tangent. The change in strength became even more intense. The rooftop of the building beneath Child's feet was like a torn rag. Long scars spread rapidly and branched out in all directions. It looked like it was about to fall apart. Child experienced the difference in strength. He knew he was no match, but he was expressionless. He only cast his gaze at Xianxia. "You've been watching for so long just for this? But it's not enough." Xianxia looked up. The source of the danger hidden behind the scenes had finally revealed itself. Right now, the giant shadow arm had formed a pitch-black pillar that pierced through the heavens and the earth. It was like a rail elevator that led to outer space. Its end was on the ground, but it was still difficult to determine where the front end was. Dark clouds and turbid mist swirled around the pillar, forming a twisted vortex. There were also layers of cloud chi that surged and surged. Lightning flashed within the vortex, revealing a terrifying might. The following changes in the situation could no longer be resolved by watching. Xianxia began to exert his strength. There was nothing special about him. Only the materialized ripples swept out from his body. They were invincible. The dark clouds and turbid mist around the giant shadow pillar split apart. The impact of the ripples made contact with the shadow itself, causing it to tremble endlessly. The demon behind the shadow seemed to feel threatened. Suddenly, a cluster of lightning and fire leaped out of the dark clouds and turbid mist and exploded on top of Xianxia's head. Xianxia did not dodge. He simply opened his mouth and inhaled, swallowing the lightning into his stomach. His expression did not change. Light crackled and pulsed around his body, but it was smoothed out by the ripples. Xianxia dealt with it rather easily after exchanging blows. But then he frowned. "It's filled with the scent of greed and restlessness." Child asked, "Is it an extraordinary?" "It does not possess extraordinary thought. It is pure chaos and chaos. It's more like a human-faced arachnid." Xianxia's line of sight swept past the giant shadow pillar and the swirling clouds. He sighed. However, it turns out that there is also the existence of a domain in the midst of extreme chaos. From this point of view, it wouldn't be wrong to say that it's an extraordinary. The so-called giant shadow pillar was an area where the spiritual and material planes interfered with each other. The dark clouds and turbid fog at the periphery were the same, but the degree of interference was much lower. As for the periphery, it was of the same level. Given that demon's abilities, it was entirely possible for him to cover the entire logic world with his power. However, its outstanding instincts allowed it to divide itself into different levels. It used the most powerful interference to distort a portion of the physical space, and then used this as a weapon to create an intense conflict with the outside world. It was like a lever using a small amount of energy to pry out power that far exceeded the limit. The dark clouds and turbid fog, the leaping lightning and fire, all of it came like this. This kind of high-level technique was the effect of an extraordinary domain. Xianxia did not dwell too much on this point. Chaotic enemies, even if they possessed the abilities of extraordinaries, were not worth paying too much attention to. This itself had no logic to speak of. Even if they could analyze something, it would only be superficial and could only be used to fool amateurs. Even if he wanted to study it, he had to find the overall mechanism that formed this chaotic power. His target was in Wang, and he had no intention of changing it at the last minute. Xianxia's figure rose slightly, the tips of his feet a few inches off the ground. Without any support, he floated in the air. At the level of extraordinaries, even if they did not have the innate ability to fly, they could still create an environment for flight through the mutual interference between the spiritual and material planes. This was also one of the uses of a domain. Wherever Xianxia went, whether it was the clouds or the lightning, they were all eliminated by the substantial ripples. It looked like he was unimpeded. And at the front of the spreading ripples, It gradually became clear like a ray of light. The giant shadow pillar, which had originally been a single entity, was now faintly transparent. The front of the ripples, which had always been very orderly, also began to distort. The demon and Ouyang Chen's domain had collided. The air in the logic world suddenly tightened and the entire area shook. The rooftop of Building A, which had been on the verge of collapse from the confrontation between Child and the dark clouds and turbid fog, had now collapsed. The priests and knights who were at a loss, all fell down miserably. Child did not have the ability to float in the air, so his figure could not avoid falling down. He fell down from the gray, turbid fog and smoke. He exhaled and a mercury-like radiance forcefully cleared the surrounding area. He raised his head to look up. However, he was not looking at Ouyang Chen, nor was he looking at the demon that had yet to reveal itself. What he saw was clearly a human-faced arachnid struggling endlessly in the shadows. The collision of the domain caused the Darksider life form, which had been submerged within the giant shadow pillar, to reveal itself. Number 3. This human-faced arachnid had just escaped into the depths of the mental plane. When it probed the deep sea, it was still strange and inexplicable. It was hard to track it down. But now that it had reappeared, its demonic body was incomplete, and its demeanor was dispirited and listless. Its entire body was ignited with flames. Most importantly, it had lost its special ability to wander in the depths of the mental plane. Was it because of the impact of the giant shadow pillar, or was it because of some other reason? Child could see that although number 3 was struggling in the shadows, it did not look like it was trying to escape. Instead, it was continuing to break into the inner layer. He could not help but suspect that the one inside was still in Wang. Doing something like this in the depths of the shadow dark domain ruled by the demons was simply suicide. Ouyang Chen, who was in the air, could see things a bit more clearly than Child. The Wang he knew was not a simple and crude character. Even if Wang acted on impulse, there would certainly be a basic reason. The conflict between the domains grew even more intense. Ouyang Chen used this opportunity to see through the layers of shadows. He could faintly see a glimmer of light shining within the giant shadow pillar. He had found the reason. Ouyang Chen quickly determined that the so-called glimmer was the projection of the scales of truth. It had not collapsed from the initial impact. Instead, it had embedded itself into the depths of the shadows. Moreover, its form was the same as before. Of course, there were still some changes. The crite that controlled the chaos element on the black plate was currently curled up into a ball. It was on the verge of death. The mist formed by the chaos element had completely melted into the surrounding shadows. It looked like the crite would be its turn at any moment. Under Ouyang Chen's attentive gaze, the human-faced arachnid number 3 was doing its utmost to shorten the distance between it and the projection of the scales of truth and the crite. The arachnid did not cower in the slightest, even though there was a terrifying high temperature and corrosiveness within the shadows that were constantly digesting it. Chapter 251. The crite entered its abdomen and number 3 suddenly stiffened. The raging flames burning around its body seemed to grow fiercer. Amidst the flames, the remnants of the demonic body were burned to nothingness in an instant. The remaining parts carried the momentum of the impact and collided with the black plate. The flames exploded before it could even get close. The entire human-faced arachnid was turned into flying ash. The bits and pieces of ash fell onto the plate. Flying ash and smoke? Ouyang Chen and Child did not think so. It was just as they expected. As the flying ash fell onto the plate, the turbid mist of chaos element, which had been exhausted and dissipated, began to bubble up. It churned and rolled, quickly forming a scale. Suddenly, a long leg pierced out from within this turbid mist. With a few fiddles, the human-faced arachnid's ugly body propped itself up from within. Its eyes were bewildered with 6 colors and its 8 legs were divided. The flames on its body dissipated and it returned to its peak state. The only difference was that its body was much smaller. It was originally on the same level as the projection of the scales of truth. Now it had shrunk by several times. It was about the same size as the crite it had just swallowed. Replacing the crite, reducing the link and reintegrating the chaos element. Unexpected but reasonable. This is indeed in Wang's style. Ouyang Chen sighed. The chaos element, which had been utterly defeated, was clearly more efficient under the control of the human-faced arachnid. It was even able to absorb nutrients from the dark shadow domain, allowing it to continue to develop and grow stronger. This process of swallowing and replacing seemed logical, but it had to be known that the image of the Krite had a rich inner meaning. It represented an extremely mature system of the order of justice and was the best choice for controlling the element of chaos. The human-faced arachnid's level of power might be above Weng's, but connecting it with the existing system of the order of justice was always a problem. Only an old powerhouse like Weng could debug a feasible plan to replace the Krite in the shortest amount of time possible and successfully implement it. The most exquisite link was not the rebirth of the human-faced arachnid, but the union with the projection of the scales of truth. The miniature figure was no longer number 3's original body. It was its reflection in the scales of truth system. The real number 3 had already merged with the projection of the scales of truth. It was difficult to distinguish the real number 3 from the real scales of truth. But that was a problem on a different level. Ouyangchen did not stop his advance. As he continued to approach the giant shadow pillar, he analyzed and illuminated the relevant areas, allowing the others to see the situation inside. There were not many people who still had the leisure to pay attention to this side, and Xianxia was probably one of them. This first priest had always been calm. However, in the face of the continuous and drastic changes in the situation, his brain was often shut down. It was only when 03 devoured the Krite that he truly woke up. Xianxia clutched his chest. The Krite had just been swallowed, and the related qi activity had been transferred and reconnected. It had almost paralyzed his heart, and now it was beating wildly in compensation. He was already considered lucky. The priests and knights around him had all fallen to the ground. No matter how the building beneath them shook, they could not feel anything. He did not know how many of them would wake up. He raised his head in a daze and looked into the depths of the shadow. Under the dual illumination of Ouyangchen and the projection of the scales of truth, the shadow there was peeling off layer by layer. A portion of it was directly evaporated, while another portion was dissolved into the turbid fog of chaotic elements. It was certain that the projection of the scales of truth was using the dark shadow domain to rapidly increase the amount of chaotic elements on the secular side. This action was fruitful. One could see it from the current situation of the scales. The projection of the scales of truth shifted once more into an unbalanced state. But this time the black plate was the one that continued to sink. This indicated that the weight of the two sides had begun to invert. Xianxia vaguely remembered that the appearance of this phenomenon was actually a preset condition when Weng spread out the evolution field. And Weng had once told him that there might be a demon mentioned in the Holy Scripture that would take their place and contend against the nearly undefeatable Fairchild. Now the demon had truly come. Moreover, the demon's strength might far surpass that of the ears of truth. Beneath the thick layer of clouds is an island covered in boiling magma. The demon carries chains on its back as it travels through the clouds. Was this Weng's verification? Right now he could not see the island or the chains, but there were layers of clouds and demons. Half of the Holy Scripture's account had been verified. In that case he could say with a bit of caution that the Gate of Truth really did exist. Was it really in Xia City? Jingzhao's face twitched slightly. If tonight was just a verification, then their mission would have been perfectly completed. They could retreat with success. But the current Weng was probably thinking differently. The body transforms into a sacrificial vessel, stealing the sky and swapping the sun. According to the ritual of the church Weng you're thinking of. Xianxia had just sorted out an idea. The white plate that was constantly rising upward was constructed by the evolution field. After the projection of the scales of truth, an image appeared for the first time. The weaker side no longer had the qualifications to remain anonymous. The first thing that appeared was the structure of a kite shield. A mercury-like glow flowed on its surface. This was the reflection of the shield of truth. It undoubtedly represented Fairchild. Xianxia cast his gaze toward Building A, but he could not see anything due to the dark clouds and turbid mist. He did not know what kind of mood Fairchild was in right now. But then an unexpected change occurred. The projection of the kite shield had just appeared when another light and shadow appeared. This one was much more concise. It was the composition of a tetrahedron with an inscribed sphere and an outer scribed sphere. Xianxia had seen it not too long ago. The format pyramid. Zheng Zhao's brain nearly crashed once more. That Luo Nan. When did he go up? The scales of truth could not just go up on a whim. The operating steps inside were very complex. They required an extremely tight foundation and connection of energy. Only Wang could carry out such operations. Considering the time conditions, this meant that when number 3 flew through the air and encountered dangerous situations, she had been dealing with Luo Nan? No matter how much weight Luo Nan occupied, the side of the white plate that carried him and Fairchild clearly could not compare to the other side, which was filled with chaotic and disorderly elements. Right now, the weights in Wang's hands were not too few. There were too many. He could easily deploy them. As long as he could bear the pressure of the demon behind the shadows, as long as he could endlessly obtain weights from the shadows, it would be very difficult to break this advantage. For this reason, Wang added the final stroke to his own plan. On top of the black plate, the human-faced arachnid suddenly opened its mouth and inhaled. It swallowed a portion of the turbid mist surrounding it into its stomach. It was unknown how the human-faced arachnid operated, but the constantly tilting scales actually began to return to normal. As it swayed, the black and white plates rose and fell. The human-faced arachnid also swallowed clouds of mist. Clearly, it was switching weights and searching for a point of balance. With enough weights, this was far too easy. The black and white plates appeared on a horizontal line once more, fulfilling the requirements of the order's holy object. It was like a fully matured seed that was buried in the void. Chapter 252. What happened? Luo Nan's mental senses chased after Wang, observing the logic world with his clairvoyance. He understood some of the changes in the situation, but he only understood half of them. By the time the giant cocoon of light appeared, he vaguely knew that he had reached the most crucial stage. However, he was limited by his level of understanding. His thoughts were stuck here and it was hard for him to continue. He could only continuously increase the precision of his senses and observe seriously. Even though this consumed 10 to 100 times more mental energy than the life sketches he had just comprehended, he felt that it was necessary. At this time, an indescribable light shone out from the projection of the scales of truth. One could not see anything by just sensing it, but under this light the black and white plates of the scales of truth instantly lost their color. Black was no longer black and white was no longer white. It was as if some crucial element had been extracted. It was as if they had been dyed together, indistinguishable. It was this indescribable light that soundlessly opened up a region within the shadow pillar. Its appearance was similar to the cocoon of light that the first 3 ablatums constructed the evolution field. It was just that it was 10 times larger. The projection of the scales of truth resided in the center of the cocoon of light. Light and shadow interweaved, forming countless lines of varying thickness. At first glance, they looked like branches that were spreading out. They grew endlessly and some even wrapped around the 2 plates. The young branches spiraled and pierced into the projection above. It didn't matter if it was the human-faced arachnid, the kite shield, or the format pyramid. Because of this, the 3 projection diagrams underwent changes at the same time. Light and shadow warped slightly and their structures melted. Holy space, extraordinary substitution. Ouyang Chen's body was covered in layers of ripples, offsetting the resistance of the shadow pillar. He approached the cocoon of light step by step. The front of the ripples had already made contact with the cocoon of light, undulating and rippling. Although his progress was not slow, he still frowned when he saw the cocoon of light form and the ripples transform. You've gone from a small substitution of worldly objects to a large substitution of the extraordinary domain. And Wang, your moves are truly extraordinary. However, has your first ablatum allowed you to borrow the power of the scales of truth? There was no response from within the cocoon of light, but Luo Nan's heart inexplicably palpitated. Substitution. He understood a bit. At this moment, the 2 ends of the scales, the human-faced arachnid, him and Fairchild, were they exchanging places? Oh, it wasn't. After all, the 2 altar frameworks were still entangled. And Wang had placed Luo Nan on the scales of truth, so the 2 frameworks were destined to form a close connection. Luo Nan could roughly sense that the 2 ends of the scale had merely blurred the boundary between chaos and order. There was no relationship of substitution between the 2. It was more like a sort of blending. Together, they formed a sort of indescribable existence, and they used this as a foundation to grow and strengthen without end. As for the replacement, it happened on an even more mysterious level and he had no idea what it was at the moment. But the human-faced arachnid, Fairchild and Luo Nan were all unavoidably affected by the exchange. They were all greatly affected. The rooftop of Building A had already collapsed. Amid the dust and debris, Fairchild raised his hands and stared at it. He watched as the flowing mercury light dimmed layer by layer, his face expressionless. Luo Nan swept his eyes over this scene. He was slightly startled and his heart suddenly throbbed. Not good. Even Child was in trouble, let alone him? Something was definitely going to happen on the main body's side. The melting of the format pyramid structure on the scales of truth was an ominous sign. Hiss! Luo Nan's mind returned to his main body and he drew in a breath of cold air. He was cut in half. Ever since An Weng pulled him into the framework of the altar of the scales of truth, he had been unable to get rid of the feeling of restraint. Now this feeling had intensified. His blood and energy were blocked, causing many parts of his body to feel numb. His control over his body had dropped substantially. In contrast, his internal organs, which lacked sensory nerves, seemed to have rebelled. The diffuse sensation of pain caused many of his internal organs to convulse. This caused Luo Nan's body to begin to tremble lightly. In the end, he even began to sway. On the AR interface, at least 7 or 8 diagrams simultaneously displayed the color of blood red, signifying danger. The whispers and conversations within the vehicle were swept clean in an instant. All that was left were the beeping sounds of the instrument's alarm, rising and falling, interweaving together. Internal organ dysfunction. Hold him up. Bai Xinyan's command rang out, but it soon faded away. This was because at this very moment, a lava-like heat poured down from the top of Luo Nan's head. His brain seemed to be boiling and it was as if someone had given him a heavy punch. His mind was dizzy and his consciousness was dazed. His mental senses lost their accuracy, and his clairvoyance became blurry and indistinct. His headquarters had actually been raided. Luo Nan did his best to calm his mind, hoping to recover his clarity of mind. But even though his thoughts were a mess, he knew that An Weng had certainly used the scales of truth and the enormous cocoon of light that had just been erected. That old fellow had really struck Luo Nan's weak spot in an instant. This wouldn't do. Luo Nan felt the incorporeal net on his body rapidly tighten. It had already bound his body tightly and it traced all the way up. It wanted to completely seal off all of the transformations of his body and soul. When that happened, he would truly be waiting for death. The unforeseen event happened too suddenly. Luo Nan had no time to consider anything else. Before the incorporeal net was about to close, Luo Nan completely obeyed his instincts. He visualized the formatting pagoda and commanded the wraith sign to exert force. Amidst the trembling of the chains, Luo Nan's soul left his body and ascended. He took a step into the depths of the mental plane. The incorporeal net closed, but it was a step too late. In the instant his soul left his body, Luo Nan could clearly hear the snapping sounds of tree branches snapping. There was also quite a bit of resistance present. Fortunately, his method of leaving his body was to borrow external force. It was close to being rough, directly charging into the depths of the mental plane. Otherwise, he might not have been able to succeed in one go. As for now, Luo Nan's mind suddenly became clear after his body and soul separated. His mental senses stabilized once more. The most miraculous thing was that the feeling of pain in his main body instantly disappeared by quite a bit. Yes, and Weng had used the blessing of the Shield of Truth to make an issue out of it. Luo Nan had forcibly left his body, breaking the mode of interference between the mental and the material. Naturally, he had broken free of the shackles. He was no longer restricted by them. It was just that nothing could ever be perfect. Though he had dodged a calamity, he had lost control of his main body. Before he could lay down, he fell backward and directly fell into Zhang Yingying's embrace. He lost all sensation. The carriage was in a flurry of activity. The situation looked as if Luo Nan was about to breathe his last in the blink of an eye. Luo Nan could not care about what would happen to his main body next. Though he had broken An Weng's plan, it was still impossible for him to completely break free from this vortex. As long as the conflict between the altar frame and the scales of truth and the formatting pagoda were still entangled, it was impossible for him to truly remain uninvolved. Right now, the results of Luonan's escape were directly reflected on the projection of the scales of truth within the so-called holy space. The formatting pagoda still existed, but it had faded quite a bit. More importantly, the state of warping and melting had reversed, returning it to a complete state. This change was neither too big nor too small, but it directly disturbed the balanced state of fusion between chaos and order. The growth of the branches within the cocoon of light came to a halt. Some of them even withered in an instant. Chapter 253. Xianxia could not help but sigh. Those who were still paying attention to the cocoon of light, the changes in the holy space, were all people with discerning eyes. The minute changes inside could not be hidden from anyone. He knew that Wang had not tricked him lightly, but they were of the same order, so he unconsciously leaned to the side. He was a clear-sworn first ablatum. He was familiar with the classics and knew how valuable the holy space, represented by the cocoon of light, was. When they had set up the evolution field, the external magic arrays were similar in shape. However, upon closer inspection, they were merely mechanical imitations. The current holy space was a domain formed by the holy object after achieving an exquisite balance. When the holy space was set up, the objects that achieved balance, whether it was chaos or order, would become sacrifices for the exchange. They would become the stepping stones to the extraordinary domain. This was the true path to the heavens of the one-step extraordinary. The order of justice viewed the holy space as the mother of the Holy Spirit. As long as the sacrifices on the scales of truth could make up for the consumption, even an extraordinary could be born from nothing. At the very least, every generation of first ablatums had achieved this through the great exchange of the holy space. They represented the blessing and supreme authority of the holy object. It was by relying on this inconceivable power that the order of justice was able to maintain a steady increase in the number of high-level experts for the past 40 years. They were able to spread their teachings to the entire world and become one of the three great secret orders. Jingxiao pondered. And Wang's fleshly body was completely destroyed. There was a 70 to 80% chance that he would use this technique to reconstruct his fleshly body, the so-called Holy Spirit body. This was also the most common use of the Great Exchange. 09 Smalt say net. If he succeeded, the order of justice would gain another extraordinary. Although the price he paid tonight was disastrous, it was still worth it. However, there was a flaw now. There was a problem at the root. Even if the body was successfully reconstructed, the so-called extraordinary could no longer be mentioned. It was a huge loss. The withering of the branches continued. Even though a considerable portion was growing to make up for the gap, the phenomenon of withering and flourishing could not be eliminated in a short period of time. What was even more fatal was that with this delay, Ouyangchen had already broken through the final obstruction of the shadow pillar. He stood outside the cocoon of light within reach. Although the holy space had endless wondrous uses, it was never a sturdy barrier. No matter what, it could not withstand the attack of an extraordinary. Xianxia closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. Wang, are you there? A strange greeting suddenly sounded. Xianxia opened his eyes in astonishment. He saw Ouyangchen standing outside the cocoon of light. He stretched out his hand and lightly knocked on the cocoon's outer shell, as if he was a guest who had come to pay a visit. He was polite and courteous. Although the sound was a bit loud, it could still be clearly heard hundreds of meters away. The cocoon of light was silent. There was no response. Seeing this, Ouyangchen muttered to himself for a while. Then he increased the strength of his fingers and pressed against the outer layer of the light cocoon. With the increase in strength, the outer shell of the light cocoon clearly sank and the texture became obvious. It looked like a raw egg that had been peeled off and left with its membrane. It was translucent and could be pierced by a finger at any time. In the end, the holy space was not a raw egg. Under the influence of external stimuli, its feedback exceeded everyone's expectations. The cocoon of light was cramping like a living thing, like an enormous heart. The branches and veins inside broke out of the wall and spread out. The shadows, which had already faded away, gathered from the periphery. They came into contact with the veins, and it was as if they had been injected with fresh blood. They came alive in an instant, layer upon layer, pouncing over to cover the cocoon of light, causing it to retreat into the depths of the shadows. At the same time, the logic world rumbled and shook. The enormous shadow pillar that had been smashed into the ground was uprooted and contracted upwards. Dark clouds and turbid mists surged like waves, assaulting one's face and causing one's heart to feel stifled. Like this. Xianxia was a bit stunned, and a thought fiercely came to mind. Wrong. This isn't the forging of the Holy Spirit body at all. He's repeating his previous actions. He wants to control. Just like controlling the human-faced arachnid, and Wang clearly wanted to use the power of the enormous shadow pillar and even the demon behind the scenes as a vessel for his soul to reside in. He wanted to achieve complete control. However, the consequences of Luo Nan's escape were showing themselves. The sound of thunder exploded. It was the roar of the demon behind the shadow pillar. Luo Nan did not reverse in Wang's direction, but the instantaneous change he created reduced the upper limits of Wang's control. The enormous shadow pillar was uprooted halfway and cracked apart with a hum. Dark shadow clouds pervaded everywhere, flooding the entire logic world. No one could dodge them. What was the difference between this and receiving an attack from a demon? Zheng Zhao's face turned green. He summoned his last bit of strength to instantly cast an incantation, erecting a transparent barrier around his body. He blocked the first wave of the shadow cloud's corrosion. However, not everyone was as lucky as him. The priests and knights of the order were enveloped by the black mist. It was as if they had been corroded by poisonous flames. Dark flames instantly ignited, and they were burned to ashes in a few breaths of time. These people had died unjustly, but they had fainted from the impact. After all, they did not suffer any pain. The ones who suffered the most were the Ablatum Knights. The corrosive attack of the shadow cloud was one thing, but what they faced was no longer an external threat. Instead, it was the shackles that had taken root in the depths of their bodies and souls over the years. They were the vessels for the magical power of the first Ablatums. This was also the source of their power. Right now, Wang's power was being channeled through this channel, giving them a boost. A boost that was completely out of control. The power of the demon's rampage far surpassed the limits of what they could endure. Muffled explosions rang out in the corner of the building. Foul blood blossomed. Several Ablatum Knights exploded one after another. At this point, the elite forces of the Order of Justice in Xia City were practically wiped out. 6 muffled explosions rang out in a row. Baze, who was just about to climb up to the rooftop, suddenly froze. His powerful body suddenly swelled up. His bones and muscles creaked and groaned. Just like that, he staggered up to the ruins of the rooftop that had already collapsed. It looked as if he would explode at any moment, but in the end, his powerful talent and the toughness of his fleshly body far surpassed that of the other Ablatum Knights. Baze opened his mouth with great effort. His originally snow-white teeth were already soaked in blood. He roared with a hoarse voice. Fairchild, who was standing on the other side of the building, turned around when he heard the roar. Baze's eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. He was already in a half-blind state, but he was still able to miraculously lock onto Fairchild's position. He roared once more and charged up. Baze only needed 2 steps to traverse a distance of several dozen meters. He smashed out with his fist. The already dim mercury-like radiance sputtered. The shield of truth was broken in one strike, and Fairchild's majestic body was blasted into the air. Baze chased after Fairchild at an even faster speed, bombarding him with a series of heavy punches. Die, 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 die. Baze's roar was devoid of any killing intent. It was just a venting of extreme pain. In the end, he simply tore apart all pretenses. Kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, come and kill me. The twisting tendons were like living snakes. They wandered around Baze's body, giving him absolute power. But at the same time, pain and despair were branded within. Chapter 254. Child did not say a word. He was purely defending. At this time, his shield of truth had been broken, and he no longer had the almost absolute defense ability. Baze, who had been forced to break through his limits, had fists that were sharper and more terrifying than any axe, hammer, or knife. They constantly tore apart Child's robe and flesh, bringing with them a thin layer of blood mist. Even so, Child was not knocked down by Baze. Even if the power of chaos continued to attack and erode him, there was still a fundamental order that always existed. No physical structure could compare to it. Baze punched again, forcibly blasting away Child's raised arm. The force of the punch penetrated Child's chest and into his lungs, crushing Child's chest until it visibly caved in. Child did not dodge. He used a hand bind and locked Baze's joints. The two of them instantly entered a more dangerous close combat. First, two heads collided with each other. In an instant, both sides were covered in blood. This collision also forced Baze's ferocious teeth back. Child was still holding on to Baze's elbow joint. Borrowing the force of the other party's charge and retreat, he pulled outwards, forcibly twisting Baze up and smashing him heavily into the rubble. But then he was also knocked over by the brute force of Baze. The strength of the two humanoid beasts was terrifying. Under the force of the collision, the floor under the rubble could no longer withstand it. Even the steel frame collapsed with a loud bang. The two of them fell together and their heads and faces were covered by the rubble above. But even so, in the narrowest space they did not stop. Instead they continuously hit each other's face, chest and waist. The colliding shock waves swept away the rubble, avoiding the result of being buried. But before they landed on the ground, both of them were already vomiting blood. No matter how injured he was, Child remained as cold as iron. The opportunity he had been waiting for finally arrived after Baze's two unreserved waves of attacks. At the cost of another heavy elbow strike on his chest, he took advantage of the gap left by Baze's overexertion and performed a joint technique, forcefully twisting Baze's left elbow joint. Then he took a heavy hit on his head and broke Baze's right shoulder. At this point, both of Baze's arms were broken. But even so, Baze was like a mad tiger. Ignoring his shattered shoulder and dislocated joints, he stood up and continued to fight. However, his rapidly declining athletic ability was no longer enough to support this kind of fighting style. Fairchild pulled away and delivered a series of combination punches, hitting Baze's chin, ears and other vital points, concussing his brain and causing him to lose consciousness. Finally, Fairchild kicked Baze's lower abdomen, temporarily dispersing the inner chi he had lost control of. Boom! Baze was sent flying and smashed into a distorted pillar. A large amount of earth and rocks fell down and covered his body. In the end he struggled to get up, but he still roared and screamed. Pure chaos and ruthlessness tormented the strongest man in Xia City to the point where he was neither human nor ghost. Fairchild panted slightly. As soon as he adjusted his breathing, he said, "Help." His voice was low and it did not travel far. When he spoke, the area within a 20-meter radius around him was filled with dark clouds. Aside from the struggling Baze, there was no one alive. However, a mere 2 seconds after his voice fell, Fairchild's chest glowed with a faint light. The tetrahedron format pyramid was half embedded in the juncture between his chest and abdomen. It helped him adjust his energy and blood, alleviating his injuries. Fairchild extended his hand and adjusted his broken ribs. Some of them had already pierced into his internal organs, causing him to bleed. But as a powerful being who was only a step away from becoming an extraordinary, such injuries were far from fatal. After the broken ribs were pulled out and reset, the self-repair function of his internal organs began to display its effect. He retained at least 50 to 60% of his combat strength. Of course, the standard of comparison was in a state without the support of the Shield of Truth. "There's still him." Fairchild extended his hand and pointed at Baze. "Are you sure?" Luo Nan's consciousness cut in from the mental plane. Fairchild had contacted Luo Nan through the order imprint that Luo Nan had projected earlier. This also showed that Luo Nan's existence in the logic world was no secret to a powerful being like Fairchild. "He can still be saved," Fairchild replied calmly. "I feel that you can do it." "All right." With just a few words, all the pressure had been thrown onto Luo Nan's body. Of course, Fairchild knew that he was not answering Luo Nan's question. He explained, "Aside from Anweng, the Order of Order has some prospects in Xia City. Yanjing Shao. You need to preserve some of your vitality." Well, Luo Nan had nearly forgotten that Fairchild was a member of the Order of Justice. Even though he was an executioner of the truth side who was as incompatible as fire and water with the secular side, he was also a fanatical believer of the Order of Justice. It was hard to fathom Fairchild's current feelings in a situation where the order of justice had suffered such disastrous casualties. But thinking about it, Fairchild was far from being happy. As for Weng, Luonan did not finish his sentence, but his meaning was very clear. Was this the time to consider preserving some of his vitality? The giant shadow pillar was rising endlessly, and Weng's plans and methods were already as clear as day. The demon behind the scenes was far too powerful. If Weng could truly create a miracle and use the scales of truth and the holy space to control the demon in one fell swoop, then the people of the logic world would probably be purged once more. You're thinking too much, Fairchild responded simply. It's not your turn to interfere in a battle between extraordinaries. This was the standard truth, leaving Luonan speechless. He sighed soundlessly and no longer spoke nonsense. He gave Baze the support of the format pyramid. Compared to Fairchild's immediate effect, Baze's situation was not going smoothly. Right now the inside of the black man's body was a mess. External and internal injuries were secondary. What was truly troublesome was the chaos element that had been forcefully poured into his body. This was a crude replacement. It was as if the chaos essence of the human-faced arachnid had been forcefully stuffed in, replacing all the functions of a human body. The fact that Baze's body did not explode on the spot only proved that Baze's body was tough to an inconceivable degree. It was useless to know the cause of the disease. Baze's chaotic essence had already fused deeply with Baze's after the previous frenzied assault. It was like a cup of water that had been soaked in ink. No matter how clear it was impossible for it to return to its original state. What's more, the amount of ink was greater than the cup of water itself. This was probably what it meant when the disease was beyond cure. Luonan switched to clairvoyance mode. He was no longer able to draw out Baze's constellation diagram if he used the life sketch method to observe. He could only draw something closer to the human-faced arachnid's dark clouds and shadows. In a certain sense, the current Baze could no longer be called a human. The chaotic essence of a demon had already deeply replaced Baze's original functions. This person should have died long ago, but he was still alive. Baze's powerful fleshly body and his crumbling internal foundation were mixed together to form this extremely special case. Chapter 255. Luonan's mental senses swept Baze inside out. The more he looked, the greater the pressure. The more he looked, the more he did not know what to do. For a time his mind was filled with resentment toward Weng. That Weng. He didn't want to be a person, but he also conveniently tricked his own subordinate. Fine, Weng did not care about this at all. He was wholeheartedly working on the demon behind the shadows. You can save him. Fairchild repeated similar words. His confidence far exceeded Luonan's. How can I save him? Luonan did not need to pretend to communicate with Fairchild. He responded in a bad mood. His heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys are all unreliable. All of his functions are in chaos. They are all for the sake of accumulating the most explosive power. The verbal information suddenly stopped here. The efficiency of the exchange of information on the mental plane far exceeded that of a regular conversation. Fairchild understood Luonan's confusion and difficulties. Luonan also roughly understood Fairchild's train of thought. He even used more concise and accurate words to express himself. Build an order frame for him and restrain him? Just like that. Fairchild's train of thought was only a general idea. It originated from the feeling of order he received on the mental plane back at Frost River Reality. Now that Luonan had added the finishing touch, Fairchild immediately praised. Order frame. This description is very good. Of course it was good. Right now Weng was doing this. Yes, there was also Luonan himself. Through the conflict with Weng on the altar frame, Luonan gained a new understanding of many things that were previously fuzzy and unclear. Altar and sacrificial offering represented a kind of order. The essence of demons was indeed chaos, but it was chaos that was controlled by a certain order. There needed to be a large frame above the chaos. Otherwise, it would be chaos that was completely meaningless. The human-faced arachnid was the best example. The Wraith Sign's many successful sacrificial offerings proved that this kind of chaotic existence could be accommodated within a high level of order. This was the only way to explain how a Darksider life form which acted completely by instinct could use efficient methods to make correct choices most of the time. The current Baze was a humanoid demon. Although it was a bit nondescript, there was no difference in essence. It would naturally be extremely difficult to make him return to his human state. However, it seemed feasible to just maintain it. Or even take it a step further. Luo Nan pondered for a moment before saying, "If you don't mind this state, you might be able to preserve your life. But this will completely change the foundation. Is there any meaning to it?" Fairchild shook his head slightly. He looked down at Baze, who was panting violently. The man's features were twisted from the pain, and his black face was stained with dirt and blood. Even his mouth was no exception. He looked as ferocious as a ghost. Sensing Fairchild's gaze, Baze's half-protruding eyes met Fairchild's. However, his pupils were dilated and no longer focused, making him look even more terrifying. The skin that bore this terrifying and hideous face was rapidly turning gray. The strength of its struggle was getting weaker and weaker, and it was also getting stiffer and stiffer. It looked like the last bit of its life could be extinguished at any time. For living beings, the essence of chaos was infinitely equal to death. On the other hand, if there was life, then its essence might not be pure chaos. There was always a glimmer of hope. "Make your move," Fairchild replied. Luo Nan didn't say anything more. The radiance of the format pyramid grew brighter and brighter at Baze's chest. This represented that Luo Nan's order was affecting Baze. However, a simple blessing from the format pyramid was not enough. He still needed a more direct and efficient method. Luo Nan needed some reference, but his consciousness had just walked around the altar frame. Information that came from the depths of the mental plane caused his consciousness to deviate a bit. He was a bit distracted. And Wang's control over the demon behind the scenes seemed to have reached a new level. Ouyangchen had already been completely driven out of the giant shadow pillar. Ouyangchen was speeding up his departure from the logic world. "Focus," Fairchild warned him. His meaning was clear. Don't touch what you shouldn't touch. Don't force yourself. Luo Nan understood Fairchild's meaning. However, the altar frame was entangled on a level like this. It was not something he could do even if he wanted to stay out of it. In reality, as Luo Nan exerted his influence on Baze, his entanglement with Wang floated to the surface once more. Wang did not pay attention to Baze, but Luo Nan had constructed an order frame to deal with the essence of chaos. It was a part of the demon that Wang had just stripped off. As a result, Luo Nan's level of tracing back inevitably came into contact with Wang's scales of truth frame. The hidden connection was instantly highlighted. Wang and Luo Nan met once more. This was not a happy meeting. Instead, it was a collision, conflict, and pursuit between two order frames on a higher level. Oh, there was also President Ouyangchen. His mental senses had come to join in on the fun. This was the first time Luo Nan clearly sensed the existence of this president, but it soon blurred away. The reason was that he was quite far away. It was like a diving competition. Luo Nan and Wang both had clear directions to reach their destination. Ouyangchen's diving depth was certainly not inferior to theirs, but he was unfamiliar with the underwater environment. He spent too much energy searching for his target, and he was left far behind by the cheating duo. In the end, Ouyangchen simply got lost. There was no need to talk about anything else. It was precisely because Ouyangchen was left behind that Wang shifted most of the energy he had placed on Ouyangchen to Luo Nan. He scanned Luo Nan over and over again, paying extreme attention. Wang could not be blamed for doing this. Right now, the holy space was deep within the giant shadow pillar. He was attempting to control the demon, but it was not completely successful. Luo Nan traced it back through the chaos element on Baze's body. They occupied different sizes inside and outside, but their levels were the same. Then the problem came: 2 frames, 2 elements, 2 directions. There was only one demon behind the scenes. Who did it listen to? It didn't want to listen to anyone. A restless roar penetrated through countless curtains into the logic world. The berserk power urged the dark clouds of shadow. The vortex seemed to have substance, corroding and tearing apart everything it covered. Dust filled the sky, and the 3 buildings swayed even more violently. Such a reaction allowed Luo Nan to confirm one step further. Perhaps the demon behind the scenes was thousands of times more powerful than the human-faced arachnid, but they were essentially the same goods. This fellow's reaction was practically the same as the burning wraith on the warship a dozen or so days ago, the previous incarnation of the wraith sign. They were both helpless when faced with this situation. The powerful instincts nurtured within their chaos could only be accomplished under a higher plane of order frame. Once this order frame encountered an attack, it would be more delightful to be captured without putting up a fight. Right now, Wang was pursuing the specific hierarchical structure of this order frame. He was simulating and overlapping in order to realize control over the demon. Wang had a clear direction. This was probably a hint given to him by the holy space. But Luonan had one as well. Chapter 256. A soft trembling sound rang through the void. With the human-faced arachnid as a living example, it was hard for Luonan not to associate it with the heavily chained crow. Over 10 days ago, Luonan had truly constructed the format and entered the level of "my heart's a prison." The speed of Luonan's progress was inconceivable even to Luonan. But he knew very well that up until now, the embodiment of his greatest ability was still the format pyramid and the heavily chained crow. This was the precious treasure left to him by his grandfather. Everything was born from this. Luonan was still unable to completely understand the mysteries within even to this day. He could only say that he had comprehended some basic principles. That was a frame. From the changes in the altar frame, it could be seen that the so-called dark chains were very much like the materialization of some high-level order frame. Luonan was unable to understand how his grandfather was able to assimilate this order frame into medicine, breathing and visualization. It was branded onto the body of a cultivator, allowing them to grasp this high-level technique. But the most important thing right now was still the application. Luonan pondered to himself that the directivity of his heavily chained crow was not much inferior to Wang's. It seemed that the crow was able to follow Luonan down a distance. But what was the point of doing that? By Xinyan and the others' mockery, Fairchild's warning at the same time, and all the previous lessons. Had he not suffered enough? Without thinking any further, the dark chains materialized and pierced through the void, piercing through Baize's head. This wasn't the first time Luonan had used the heavily chained crow on a living person, but this was certainly the first time he had a clear goal of order. Luonan did not understand or pay attention to the specific circulation of blood energy. His attention was completely focused on the effect of the order frame on the nature of chaos. To say that it was useful was an overestimation for him. Luonan had never been an expert in interfering with the material plane. Now, the direction of his development had begun to shift towards pure observation. To a large extent, he had given up on interacting with the material plane in exchange for outstanding performance in mental sensing. It was impossible for Luonan to turn Baize into a marionette. It was also impossible for Luonan to forcefully turn Baize onto a new orbit of order. All he did was guide Baize to see through the chaos mist and the higher-level new order that was eroded by the chaos elements. With this, he could sort out the structure of Baize's body and soul and alleviate the damage caused by the chaos element's erosion. The problem was that Baize had already lost his basic control. Even if there was a clear answer in front of him, it would be difficult for him to follow up. Luonan had long since anticipated this. This was the final fork in the road. Luonan gave Fairchild one last reminder. This is my order frame. But Luonan did not say anything. However, he did not say a word. He half knelt down and punched Baize in the chest. Baize spat out a mouthful of blood which splattered all over Child's face. The latter was unfazed and threw another punch. However, at this time Baize, who was paralyzed on the ground, straightened his upper body and used his chest to block Fairchild's fist halfway. At this moment their eyes met. Fairchild raised his chin slightly. "If you want to live, follow me." Baize gasped for air. The pain caused by the corrosion and symbiosis of the chaotic elements was still ongoing. Inside and outside of his body, every blood vessel was twisting and every muscle was twitching. In the midst of chaos, the human body's habitual functions and order had long since changed beyond recognition, and there was no possibility of recovery. Chaos. World Nan. To say to the human body. And the human body function. And this was something that he was unable to accomplish in a short amount of time. And Luonan was currently demonstrating a certain possibility for him. Base could only comply. He had no other choice. Base closed his eyes. His breathing became hurried and chaotic. Then it suddenly stopped. A few seconds later it resumed and the cycle repeated. At the same time the muscles, bones, blood vessels and internal organs of his body squirmed crazily. They matched the rhythm of his breathing. After repeating it 5 times, which meant that he had failed 5 times, Base suddenly let out a wild roar. The back of his head slammed against the floor of the ruins. His body twitched violently and his blood vessels bulged all over his skin, forming an ugly and ferocious image. Time passed second by second. The dark clouds and turbid mist stirred by the giant shadow pillar corroded layer after layer of the building. Parts of the building collapsed from time to time. The skyscraper was on the verge of collapse. A portion of the dark clouds and turbid mist came over. Of course they could not harm Fair. They could do nothing to Luo Nan, but they were inexplicably attracted to the roaring bays. They went in and out of his mouth and nose. It was as if they were making some sort of exchange. Fair was unmoved. He watched all of this in silence. Hiss. A long breath rang out. Bays suddenly exerted his strength. In a short 2 seconds he actually sucked in all the mist around his body. His painfully struggling body swelled slightly. Then it suddenly froze and he collapsed back onto the floor. He gasped for breath. His chest rose and fell clearly, but his breathing had already entered the range of that of a normal person. This meant that Bays had found a new order of life amidst the chaos and disorder. However, this might not be a satisfactory ending for Bays. Bays opened his eyes. His ice-cold eyes pointed at the night sky, unfocused. His malevolent aura was like a flame beneath a layer of ice. It was weak but tenacious. Luo Nan knew that this brother's gaze was directed at him. But what could he do? An interesting change appeared in the structure of the pyramid. Bays's figure silently appeared on the staff level. This was the result of Bays reconstructing the structure of his body and soul in accordance to the established order with the help of the heavily chained crow. Luo Nan had already explained this to Fair in advance. Fair tacitly agreed, but Bays might not be completely convinced. Fine, Bays would definitely reject Bays. Luo Nan did not have many examples of what sort of restrictions one would have to endure as a member of the format pyramid. The comparison was not strong. Wraith Sign, who was on the skill level, was very obedient. Cat Eyes, who was on the student level, was very unruly. As for Bays, who was on the staff level, the heavily chained crow suddenly trembled violently. Bays's body fiercely twitched amidst the rattling vibrations. Deep within the structure of his body and soul, a hook that had long since been warped and deformed shattered. In an instant an obscure fluctuation penetrated through the air. Luo Nan was startled and shocked. He cried out in his mind, but before he could react, An Weng's telepathic thoughts were like a long sword drawn from a furnace. They sliced through the air, bringing with them an intense burning pain. That hook was certainly the method An Weng used to control ablatum knights like Bays. Even though Bays had been abandoned by An Weng, it was hard to avoid alarming An Weng when this sort of change occurred. However, the reason for An Weng's intense reaction was not as simple as losing Bays. Luo Nan had realized his control over Bays. He had erected a restraining order on top of Bays's chaotic essence. In a certain sense, this was tantamount to controlling a portion of the power of the demon behind the scenes, even if it was a portion that had been abandoned. This was just like An Weng trying to control a continent. He had turned the sky and earth upside down, but he had yet to obtain any results. But Luo Nan, who was next to An Weng, had first taken control of a small island that had separated from the main body of the continent due to a volcanic earthquake. This was probably what it felt like. Metaphors could describe reality, but in the end they could not replace reality. Luo Nan and An Weng did not have the relationship of an island and a continent. There was no vast ocean between them. There was only an indescribable distance of sensing. It was too dangerous. If Luo Nan was An Weng, he would probably think the same. Plus, there was another element that seeped in. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.